In this video, I'm going to talk about the 3 vs 3 game that we just played on September 14th, which was last Saturday. This is a standard conquest game with standard non-turbo settings, and the map is a giant-sized Arabia. The civilizations were the Portuguese, Spanish, and the Huns on one team versus the Franks, Lithuanians, and Khmer on the other team. I'm going to give some advice on how to improve speed building up in the Dark Age for each player, because I noticed that this is an area where most players in this game can improve fairly easily with a couple of changes. Later on in the video, I'll look at the main attacks in the game and ideas for improving defense against those attacks. I'll also talk about a couple of important things to research earlier in the game. In this game, I was the blue player, the Lithuanians. What I'm going to show first is my initial build up to the Feudal Age, and a few recommendations on ways to speed up your development in the early game. The first step I do before even touching the scout is to assign one villager to build a house, and then I have the other two start herding the sheep for the slaughter. Once the villagers are assigned tasks, I immediately queue up some villagers at the town center. At this point, I grab the scout and tell it to start exploring in circles at the edge of my visible area by using the gather points. To do this, just select the scout, hold shift, and right click a bunch of times around the town in a circle at the edge of your explored area. And once you do this a couple of times, you should have found all the key things that you need for the early game. These include finding a clump of nearby trees for the lumber camp, 3 to 4 additional sheep besides what you start with, the berry bushes, the primary gold ore, and 2 heavy animals, like boar, elephants, or rhinoceros. I recommend locating all of these, but especially the animals and a decent forest before sending the scout to explore the map further. The most important thing you need to focus on in the early game is keeping villagers queued at the town center and keeping the villagers that you have working on wood and food, primarily. I usually recommend keeping a balance between wood and food in your villagers, putting the same number on each, unless you're going for a specific rushing strategy. In this game, I create nothing but food gathering villagers until I have 12 of them, monitoring the number at the top of the interface. A good way to check if you have villagers queued currently at the town center is to look for the villager icon in the upper left corner of the screen. Nothing is there, you have no units being trained. If you want to delay researching Loom for a bit and focus on creating villagers, you can garrison the villager that's being chased in the town center to keep them alive. I recommend collecting from both of the heavy animals near your town, as it is the fastest way to get the food you need to continue training villagers. You can start transitioning to berries once you are running out of animal sources for food. I'm going to go ahead and speed up the game a little until I start researching the Feudal Age. You can see that the time when I start is 9 minutes 30 seconds. This is a good time to shoot for if you are going with 24 villagers in the Dark Age. The only time that I'm not training villagers is for a few seconds at the very beginning of the game. It's important to keep your villagers training constantly, because if you lack a good foundation of villagers in the early game, it can continue to hurt your economy throughout the entire game. I recommend training 20 to 25 in the Dark Age. Now we're going to look at a few other players, and I'll give a couple of tips on how to improve their Dark Age build-up. We'll look at the Portuguese player first, who is the purple color in this game. Alright, I see that the scout is moving first here. I recommend not doing this and instead tasking all of the villagers first, one to build a house and putting the other 2 on sheep. Then once they're moving, then move to the scout. Getting the house built early is very important so your town center doesn't get frozen by the 5 population cap. She did a good job of avoiding the population cap here, but if you look at the timer, she started creating the first villager a little late, so I would recommend getting the first house placed a little quicker. If you tell one villager to build a house right at the start, it should be fast enough to keep from ever hitting the population cap, as long as it's the first thing you do. The scout is moving, but it doesn't look like rally points are being used here. In the future, just try holding down shift and right clicking a bunch of times in a circle pattern around the town. Once he's scouting in that pattern, you won't have to mess with him for a minute, and you can focus on training villagers or doing something else. This is a great location for the lumber camp. They should be placed right up against the wood line, so this looks good. You almost lost this villager here, so again, try garrisoning inside the town center and just let it out right after. This is a great spot to kill the elephant, pretty much as good as you can get right next to the town center so the villagers don't have to walk any distance to drop off the food. I've noticed that the town center is going idle here for a few seconds. That can be improved by just continuing to check in the upper left corner or clicking on the town center to make sure villagers are being created. Here's a tip to keep villagers training constantly. If you have under 50 food and see that the last villager in the queue is about to be finished, go ahead and select a couple of villagers that are harvesting the animal and right click on the town center to drop off the food they are holding immediately. This should give you enough to train another villager instead of waiting for all the food to come in at the same time. You can see how much time is spent here with the town center doing nothing. Here you can see the gray player capturing sheep near this town. If you want to be a good teammate, don't take sheep that are this close to another player unless you have agreed ahead of time. I'm sure this was accidental, but those sheep can be a critical part of speed in the early game, and if they are gone, you are forced to adapt. Next time, if you capture sheep next to a teammate, just send them into the other player's town so that they can capture them. A way to prevent villagers from standing around doing nothing once they are created is to place the town center's rally point. With the town center selected, right-click on a resource to have the villager tasked to that resource automatically when they are created. This is what I'm doing the entire time when I play. I'm just shifting the rally point around to different resources depending on what I want the next villagers to do. Everything about this build-up has looked pretty good so far. Just try those things that I mentioned to prevent the town center from sitting idle. You should be able to get at least 4 more villagers out before the feudal age. Keep track of the count and make 20 minimum in the dark age. Alright, now we're going to move over to the Spanish player Mirkwood Metropolis and evaluate his dark age. First thing I notice is that you're taking too long to move this initial villager to build the houses, so go ahead and do that sooner next time. These houses are a little far away from the town center, so go ahead and bring those in closer. Just leave space for farms, but they can be built a lot closer than this and it'll save a little time. You probably want to scout a little more in the hometown before sending the scout off like this. Remember, no one's attacking you in the first few minutes of the game anyway, so you have some time there. You found the mines and stuff in this game, but you still haven't discovered the second heavy animal. Another thing I would recommend is to go after the elephant right away instead of focusing on the berries this early. It will improve your speed quite a bit in the Dark Age and help improve villager production. Take out both heavy animals before moving on to other sources of food like berries. The red player is doing a good job of keeping all the villagers busy so far. Not seeing much of idle villagers hanging around this town. This is too long of a waiting period where the town center is doing nothing here. A lot of times I just queue villagers and focus on gathering from animals. Then when I'm at 20 villagers or so, I'll already have around 400 food and almost be ready for the feudal age. You should never be waiting for more than about 30 seconds to pile up resources for the next age. If you are, go ahead and train an extra villager or two. That's about it for this town, going to the feudal age, and the villagers are well balanced between wood and food here. Next, we'll go ahead and look at the Huns, which is the gray player, Dubble Oh Evan. All villagers are moving at the start, which is good, but this one has started idling a little, so watch for that. Just make sure your villagers are busy before touching the scout. It took a long time to start training your first villager in this game, so I recommend queuing up villagers the first thing you do if you're the Hun, since you don't have to worry about the pop cap. Alright, you also need to be setting rally points for the town center. Click the town center and right click the resource you want them to work on. You can see that tasking each villager that comes out of the town center can be tedious, and the amount of idle time for these villagers will add up over time if each one of them is standing there idle for a couple of seconds before it does anything. You did miss scouting for the second heavy animal, that could have improved things for you in this game. He's luring the elephant at a good time here, which should be about 3 or 4 minutes into the game if you're doing well. And the animal didn't even attack him here, so that's good. Now we're seeing some idle time at the town center here. You have 50 food, so you could be training a villager now. This kind of thing will kill a rush strategy, so you need to optimize the production and have them coming out constantly. Remember to watch the icon in the upper left corner to make sure there's a villager there. "14 villagers is really early to start going to the feudal age, so I would say even for a rush strategy you want to train at least 2 to 3 more. I practiced this build up while trying to focus on optimizing speed and not idling the town center, and I managed to get to the feudal age at the same time but with 4 more villagers, so there's room to improve here. You have a villager here on gold preparing to create archers in the feudal age, so that looks good. I would think about your balance of villagers on food and wood a little bit more. Seems like having that few on wood may hurt you for the next age if you're planning on making archers. You may want to change that pretty quickly after you start researching feudal age. Just move a few villagers over to wood and you'll be good. Alright, the most important thing you need to work on is to not leave your TC idle for this amount of time. Alright, now we're going to move on to the yellow player's town, the Khmer. You have your villagers here, but you're focusing on scouting too early, when you should be telling the villagers to do something first. Just tell one to build a house, and the other 2 to harvest the sheep. You're using good technique for scouting the town though by using the rally points, and you've identified both heavy animals and the important mines nearby. You're researching loom early, which is okay, but not required if you lure the animal correctly by garrisoning the villager in the town center if they're being attacked. It's a little bit of a slow start, but I can see in the corner that villagers are now staying queued up so far. Now I can see the town center is staying idle for a bit. Not a huge time loss there, but it can be improved a little. Looks like there are too many houses being constructed in the Dark Age here. I would not recommend going over 5 unless you have a good reason to do so. One thing you can do is just time it so that every time you advance to the next age, you start constructing new houses. This is what I do, and it helps as a reminder. Once you're advancing to the next age, you really don't have too much to think about with the town center, so it's just a good time to build structures. Switching to the farms a little earlier than you would like here. He should focus on luring in the heavy animals first to speed up his time to the feudal age. I would also produce at least 3 to 4 more villagers and have them balanced between food and wood by the time you are advancing to the feudal age. Overall, not a bad Dark Age, but you can definitely improve using some of the recommendations earlier in this video. Now we'll take a look at the attacks and defense in this game, and I'll give some advice on how I think you can best improve. The first attack in this game was sent by the Grey player here. He sends in about 8 archers, and this attack fails pretty quickly, and the reason it failed is because there was already a defensive force stationed here with skirmishers that directly counter archers. There was also a tower that Grey took a little fire from, which compounded the problem for the attack. Had this attack occurred just a couple of minutes earlier, it could have been more effective as I did not have units here at the time. One thing you could have done here was to send a scout in ahead of time to identify a weak point over to the left, and then you could have attacked my main wood line, and you probably would have taken out a few villagers if you had done it this way. This was a good tactic that y'all tried here that I almost didn't catch until it was too late. The purple scout comes in and lures all my units off the defense of this area. Had another attack come in right away, I could have lost my attempt at a castle and a number of villagers with it. And I could have been in some trouble early on in this game. In hindsight, I should have had these units on defensive stance so they wouldn't chase a scout halfway across the map. Grey has a good idea here to play aggressively and try to castle right next to this forward gold mine. Unfortunately, I'm also sending a villager to this mine at the same time and discover the plan early. The castle does take out a number of my archers and skirmishers, but is unable to attack any units at the base because of murder holes not being researched at the university. Another good idea for defense here would be to garrison archers inside the castle in order to fire additional arrows out, but without murder holes, the castle is destined to take heavy damage and ultimately falls. At this point, I decided it's a good idea to attack Grey's town directly and catch his town center and farming villagers largely unguarded. There were some cavaliers here from the red player, but they weren't stationed in the best spot to counter this attack. Purple sent in a pretty good defensive army and knocked out most of my attacking force. This would have been a good time for all players on the opposing team to build a few additional barracks and counter me with halberdiers, since my attacks to this point were entirely cavalry. Building walls and additional castles is also a good idea for purple here. To her credit, she does place a castle in a great position here, offering good defense for both town centers, but in this game more was required. At this point in the game, I decide to go for an attack on Purple's town, following up the attack on Grey's town, along with Elephant Ballista units from Yellow joining in on the attack. The town turns out to be pretty well defended, but Purple does lose the monastery here. The Red Army is here to offer a good defense and beats back the attack. If I were the opposing player, I would have started quickly cranking out lots of halberdiers here. You can see the red player has a lot of them queued up. What's going to happen next is that the green player is going to join in and start attacking red, and the Frankish paladins are going to do some damage. I'm able to build up a large force of paladins, elite lightists, and back them up with a few halberdiers. This attack on his own may not have succeeded, but at the same time the green player, who is the Franks, decided to send in paladins to attack red on another front. This makes it impossible for Red to offer any defense of Purple's town, and Purple resigned at this point in the game. Purple could have defended this attack better by constructing 1 or 2 additional castles and additional barracks that could train halberdiers. Halberdiers would have been a good defense against all of our forces in this game, since they were all basically in the cavalry class of units.